Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us again. Those of you who've just had your break, good evening to everybody joining us on Zoom. I will do a quick welcome once again because I think there's a couple of hundred of you joining us there as well. First of all, big thank you to everybody who's made this event possible. So that's ourselves at BASRAP, Andrew at Theraplast, Owen at UA92, and of course our sponsors this evening, VisitQuick and WinBank. Of course, the proceeds from tonight's event are supporting the Running Bee Foundation, and those of you joining on Zoom, if you would like to make a contribution, we'll be sending you out a link after the event. I do apologise if we run into any technical issues if you're joining us on Zoom. It's the first time that we've had to do one of these hybrid events because it is our first in-person meetup since COVID kicked off. We've got two absolutely stellar speakers this evening. We've got both halves of Manchester represented. So we're very pleased to have Diane Ryding from Manchester United and Dave Fevre, consultant physiotherapist at Manchester City currently. So whether you're red or blue, there's a bit of something for everybody this evening. I am just going to swap the presentations over and then I will hand you over to the very capable hands of Di and Dave. This is where I'll mess it up. So, let's get that one, isn't it? Brilliant. We should be all set. Over to you guys.
Right. Thanks for inviting us here. I'm sure hopefully you'll get something out of the next hour and a half if we got through to sleep. Tips for working in professional football. Probably the best advice is don't do it. All right. Probably the best thing I have to say to you. What's happened to my hair? It's all disappeared. Hopefully we're going to try and give you 15-20 minutes realistic like working in football. From my point of view, I've been in professional sports since I was, I don't know, 23, 24 when I started as physio. So I worked in the NHS for a few years and then I basically came in sport within a short period of time once my own career was over very quickly. It was time to do something else. So I've been working in sport ever since. So I've been lucky enough to work over the road at Lancashire and at Man U and at City and various other places throughout the world. So I've been very, very lucky, and for me it's the best job in the world, so I still enjoy it. And why I still work the hours I do work, and I know the hours that Diane will point as well, it's the same. So we're going to try and give you a realistic picture, all right? Give you the good and the bad, all right, and the ugly, all right, in terms of what's there. So hopefully you get something from it. The important thing is that first of all, you are part of a team within a team, all right? That's the important thing. And again, for those of you who are coming in at different levels, that team might be smaller than what you see on the board there. You know, when you're working at somewhere like Diane's working now, that's the sort of people you've got there. I've just spent 15 months in AFL2 with Barrow, and you can imagine we didn't have half the people on there, okay, in that situation. So the important thing is that you are a team within a team, all right? Now, it might be that you take on multiple roles. We've both been in situations where you're not just a physio, you might be the kit man, you might be the podiatrist, you might have to take on other jobs. You know, you might say, look, it's not my job, I'm a physio. You've got to get that out of your head. Because if you want to survive, you've got to be multitasking in terms of what you do. So that's really, really important. So that's important for you as a career and how you develop. In terms of what you need to know about, obviously, if you're going to specialise from a sports point, then I apologise to people on the far side because I'm not on this one. Obviously, those are the main things. The MSK is a big one. Sports science is obviously important, and cardiology. When I first qualified as a physio, I worked in the centre of Manchester. And I got a buzz out of working with patients. And I still use stuff today in my practice that I learned from when I first qualified when I was like 21, working with people with strokes. So that follows through from there. So whatever you do, and those of you who are working in NHS and so on, that is not wasted years. You know, I've worked on ICU where we're doing stuff now with trauma that Diane and I do in terms of working at the FA. So that ability to work with patients who are obviously very ill does make a big difference. So that's important to understand, that it's not the be all and end all. One of my bits of advice to people in sport is when you first qualify, don't go into sport. And I've told so many people that, and some of them come for jobs, you apply for it, they're the best candidates, and I say to them, when you apply, brilliant, you're the best person for the job. I'm going to offer you the job, but my advice to you is don't take the job, because you need to go and get it grounded within the NHS, within that area of working with MSK, outpatients, and so on. So as much as you want to get into sport, try and learn from the fact that you need to develop that in other areas. Otherwise, you get a very narrow CV, and then when you come to want to move on, people look at your CV and you go, so what have you done? Yeah, I've worked at Blackburn Rovers for so many months, I've done this, but there's nothing other than sport. People want something wider than that. You know, I would go up in rugby, and I always, I have to tell you this now, is that I always have a bit of bias for that, because I think if you go with trauma in rugby, you can go with trauma in football. But to try and push yourself, that's really important. It's not as glamorous, all right? You don't get many nice trips away with the rugby, but at the same time, you learn a hell of a lot, and that for me is a key issue. Obviously, injury assessment and diagnosis. I would rather not use that picture. I think clinical skills are a massive thing. It's all right having MRIs, it's all right having scans and so on. But it doesn't always give us the true clinical picture. So I'm a big believer. Some of them might have heard the lecture on assessment and clinical assessment. So I'll move on quick. Obviously, stuff that Diane and I do working for the FA, pitch side injury and emergency care. Lo and behold, because of what happened in the summer with Christian Eriksen, everybody suddenly now has jumped on the bandwagon that yeah, we need to do AED skills and BLS. So trust me, that's been around for a long time. Right? And there's been a lot of people who've worked not only as delegates but now tutors, because that's been a big key part of people in terms of that trauma side. The football and rugby league, which I'm involved with, carried that shit through for a long period of time. So it's not just suddenly happened because of Christian Eriksen. That's been going on for a long period of time. For brief one, I'm sure some of you remember. Rehabilitation. That's what floats my boat. All right, I'm not an administrator. I don't get involved in that side. I don't want to be in that situation. I want to work with players, I want to work with athletes. So it's been my vocation, and it still is now to this day. So that's the key part for me. That's what gives you rules and what gets you back to doing your job the next day and get up and doing it again. So that's important. Obviously, looking at research, how can we help people as they develop? And again, that's a key part of the job. And you've got a professional right to do it, you've got a professional interest to do it, so that's really, really important. So there's lots of things there that you might go, yeah, fancy it, don't fancy it, and hopefully we'll show you both sides. So what's the important bit of it? You can be part of a player's development, you can see players develop, more ways to go on. You're part of a team, you might be working with different age groups. My kids say to me, because you work with young people, it keeps you young in terms of, I totally agree with that. All right, that's a key factor in terms of it. Obviously, the things that Man U financial plays a big part. So if you think you're going to make a fortune working in sport, again, all right, it doesn't happen. So that's not what you're doing it for. You're doing it because you want to enjoy it. I still enjoy my job as much now as when I first started when I was 21. All right, so that's a few years ago, and I still get calls about going every day. So that's really, really important. The nice thing about working with players, and my wife would say to, she's a physio, and she would say she treats 20 patients a day, I treat one a day. And she goes to me, how can you do your job like that? And I go, well, how can you do your job like that? So we sort of have opposite sides in terms of what we do. And again, Dice talked about access to state-of-the-art equipment. Trust me, if I wrote last year, we did not have any state-of-the-art equipment. All right, we went back to medicine balls and dumbbells, simple things that don't cost a lot of money, but you get a lot of exercise out. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. In other words, you might spend 50 grand on a piece of kit, but it might do one exercise. You might get a barbell with loads of weights on, and you can get 180 exercises out of it. It's your imagination and how you apply that's important. So that's not the be on and end on. You'll see when I talk about in March later on. Opportunity to travel. I know Diane, we actually were working in China, didn't we? Not so long ago. So that's ironic. And you do get, I've been lucky enough to sort of work in Australia for 3-4 months, Papua New Guinea, you name it. You do get a lot of opportunities, and I've been very lucky that way. But again, you might say, yeah, I've travelled, I've been here, I've been there. You don't see anything other than a hotel room, training ground, back to the hotel, training ground. And suddenly you get on a plane to come home and you didn't realise you've been in somewhere that you've never heard of. All right. So I used to quite enjoy it when we got European trips to places you didn't know. That's the thing for me. I loved it. The players were like, no, we want to go to Milan, we want to go to Barcelona. I was the opposite. Or Fevre or out to Sweden or something like that. I prefer the obviously the large matches. Does it make a difference? I don't think it does. Diane might say yes or no. My own personal view, once you're doing the game, whether there's one man and a dog there for dog and duck, or whether there's 80,000 there, it doesn't really make a difference. You're still doing the same job. Your job is watching what's going on. Is there something going on with trauma? Are you going to be involved in a life-threatening situation in the next second? Can you sky 36 cameras on you, the people analysing what you do. Confidence or arrogance to do what you do, but it's part and parcel for me. I think when you're inexperienced and not able to do it, one of my bits of advice is when you become good at doing the trauma side, it's like being a good chess player. You need to be one step ahead of what's actually happening in front of you. So if somebody's struggling with an airway and not able to breathe properly, I need to go on to the next step to check circulation. I need to know what's going on quickly, so then I can interact with what's going on in that role. So that's the goal. I get a nice piece of trainer today. What a job, I get paid 20, 30 grand a week to train every day. Tell you what, I'm not there outside of that, so that's important. So you've got to be committed, you've got to be flexible. I want to work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. Don't bother. All right, it's a dietitian. And I got this one that's in Scotland. Nicholas is golf, and he said to me, yes, maybe lost in a week. All right, can't problem. Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, I want to do it. It was getting on Tuesday nights, and it's getting to Saturday, and people coming on Sunday, and you've got to come in because of that. You want that routine, but once you have your own sports period, you cannot put it alongside to work at it. It takes the time that we have to put in. It's impossible to do. But it depends where your commitment is. You know, I practiced playing rugby when I was 26. To get to where I wanted to be. So I had a retired fisherman and threw myself into my job. So what I've done side by side. Long hours away from home. Our families will tell you that. You know, you're back control of the phone. One of our phones are worse than ever. From your point of view. You're on call 24/7. You are. All right, that's absolutely right. Can take a toll on your family life. But it's a cutthroat world, you know. It is a bit doggy dog. You've got to be looking to be in the right place at the right time, and you've got to be able to do that from there. So, but that would be my little take on where you are in terms of tips. I hope I've given you some realistic stuff, and then I'm going to take on from the next bit.
Great. So, tips for working in football. Just starting with having an understanding of the sport, whatever sport that you're in. You know, certain sports actually don't want you to know anything and have no interest in. So, Formula One actually likes the medical staff to have no interest, so that you're not actually distracted by watching the races. But generally, in your sports that you're going to have to rehab people back to performance, you're going to have an understanding of positions as well as the game itself. The big thing I would say to people coming in is you need to be flexible. Being flexible, like Dave said, you're going to be called upon all times a day. But if you're a casual physio, kind of just coming into the ground, as a permanent member of staff, really, you need people to pick up games. You need people to turn up on that match, which is, you know, so far away on a coach on a Sunday morning in the middle of winter and it's snowy and icy. Realistically, if you're not prepared to do that, you're not going to get through to permanent jobs. Okay, so that's my big thing is really you've got to be flexible when you start as a physio in football and take opportunities as they come. It might be that it's not necessarily the club that you ultimately want to work as, but it could be a stepping stone and you can learn so many transferable skills from there. Have you got appropriate skills for the role? So first aid, we talked about Dave, said that we both teach for the FA. Worst thing that can happen on a football pitch is cardiac arrest. It's not a sprained ankle. I'm not too worried if my physios come in and they want to ask questions about sprained ankle. What I want to know is, can they deal with a cardiac arrest or an airway issue? So Mike and I have a kind of saying really, and it's are you the right person at the right time with the right skills? So you do need to make sure that whatever sport you're in at whatever level, whether you're coaching, whether you're going to be athletic development, whether you're going to be physio, that you've got the appropriate first aid course for your level. Good clinical skills is kind of there without saying. You're going to get paid a lot of money to work in sport. You might not be paid a lot of money to work in sport, but athletes are going to expect you to have good clinical skills. I've had a lot of casual physios who come to me and say at other clubs that they've been at, note writing is just not really emphasised that much. So you need to think, especially if you're working with young children, you could be actually called upon till the child's in the 20s to defend your notes from under 15. Okay, so if your club that you're working with doesn't have, say, an electronic note system or something that they're going to safely store your notes, you need to take that responsibility on yourself. Having appropriate insurance is really key. So if you're a charter physio, I'm not sure on the sports therapists, but charter physios, the CSP does not insure you for working with professional footballers, and they don't even insure you for young kids from about 15 upwards when they're playing for international teams. So your club needs to then take on some insurance for you. These three really link, and it's just so key to have good communication skills, work with the team around you, and be prepared to learn from other members of the team. Think about how you're going to communicate with that team. So yes, it's great to have lots of informal communication, and I'm really, really pro those soft skills about going and speaking to someone about a player. But you also need, if you've been in football long enough, you know that there's going to be times when there's a challenge on what's going on with that player. So having something formal like we do on a Saturday, we have a little injury report that goes around every Saturday, and that's a formal documentation of what's going on. So you're kind of backing everything up that you say as well. If you've worked in sports as long as Dave and I have, you're going to have an element of resilience. Not everything's going to go right. And there's going to be times when you're going to have to stand up and defend the decision of yourself and your team. So that's where really communication within your team, within the medical team, is going to be so key, because there could be a time when there's a decision, what was going to happen with this player, and you're going to have to defend it. So resilience is going to be key. And then don't be undervalued. So it's great if you can get some experience working at a club, but don't be there for 3-4 years doing volunteer work. All right. Really, they should be paying you. It's great to get a bit of experience. Don't let them take advantage. How to get involved in sport? Approach clubs, all levels, with your CV. Either send them into the club or find out from LinkedIn. You can generally find out emails now. Ask for volunteer opportunities, great in a short term. Get some experience under your belt. Job websites, if you're really looking heavily for careers in sport, Football Medicine Performance Association has lots and lots of jobs on there from a football perspective, and not just physio, they have kind of athletic development as well. Other ones like UK Sport, Sport England, club websites are another good one. So each club, if you go on like Man United, it'll have kind of jobs and vacancies and careers. If you click on that, we have to legally kind of advertise any jobs that are coming up. So having a look on individual clubs' websites as well. British Olympic Association, CSP websites, and other things like Indeed or Job Escalator. Anything that's on Football Medicine Performance or CSP generally gets pulled through to your general websites. Try and give yourselves the right qualifications for the job. So if you're going for a job, if you want a full-time position in sport, making sure that you've got some form of first aid qualification to go into that role. Now, if you're a casual physio, we'll actually put you through that. So you're not a permanent, you come and do full-time NHS job and come and do evenings and weekends with us. We will put you through a first aid qualification. But realistically, if you're going to be looking for full-time work, ideally you'd want that anyway. Other courses related to sport, whatever sport you're in. If you're going to go in rugby, you're going to be doing a lot of soft tissue and you're going to be doing a lot of strapping. So you may be thinking about doing those courses. If you're looking for work in an academy, maybe going on some kind of paediatric seminar or something like that would be much more use to you. And being back in person is lovely because you actually get the opportunity to network. Done quite a number of these over lockdown, and just sat in your kitchen, it finishes, computer shuts, and then that's it. And you don't get any feedback at all. Okay, so just networking at these events is really good. When we talk about casual academy physios, we talk about what's essential and what's desirable. So really essential is a physiotherapy degree, and they need to be a HCPC or registered CSP. Other clubs, you might have a sports rehab or sports therapy degree to get in. Our club, we're looking for band 6+ physios, and the reason that is because we have multiple sites. So we'll have one physio on one site at the Cliff, one physio, say, at Littleton Road and away. So we have to have senior grade physios. We can't just have basic physios because they've no supervision. You're going to have to be able to communicate and able to work with children if you're going to work with them. I remember interviewing someone, and he had all the qualifications. I turned to the doc and I said, never smiled at me once. He never made me feel like he was happy to be here, or he was just so, and I'm thinking, how's my under-9 going to be with that guy? You can't even smile, you know? So if you're going to go for an interview, you've got to show a little bit of personality as well, okay? Desirable, previous experience in sports or previous paediatric experience, great if you've got it. If you've not, we would take you on without and teach you. MSc has become more and more kind of desirable now in an appropriate subject. That doesn't necessarily mean physio, it might be strength and conditioning, biomechanics, all kinds of different things. And your first aid qualification, if you're going to come with this first aid qual, then that's great. All right. Anything else, Dave? Great.
So, are we going to go straight into your next presentation?
Yeah.
You're first, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Just to everybody on Zoom, whilst I'm stood here, apologies for the sound issues with the first part of that. I think, Diane, yours was fine. Dave, we struggled a little bit with your audio. So just when you come back up for us, Dave, would you be able to stand a little bit closer to the laptop? Okay. For everybody that's on the Zoom and is shouting at me virtually, we will be able to turn the sound up on the recording. We'll be able to edit that. So do watch the recording and the sound will be fixed for you, I promise. Should be all set.
Right. Right, so just to kind of start and introduce myself, really. My name's Diane Ryding. My role is Head Foundation and Youth Development Physio at Manchester United. And what that means in real terms is I work with the under-9s to 16s. I have a team of full-time members of staff and then casual physios. So there's like 4 full-times and then about 20 casual physios as well. So there's lots of people looking after around about 170 young boys. So just to say as well, thanks for Steriplast and Basra and UA92 for hosting us this evening. So last time during lockdown when I spoke about working in an academy, the emphasis really was on kind of growing pains, about recognising injuries and about rehab of injuries. But today we're going to look at beyond injuries, so everything else really. So things like we need to understand growth, maturation and performance, and that's of the body and the brain as well. We need to have a real clear understanding of the IDT, an athlete-centred approach. And we need to know a little bit more around physiotherapy within the academy, so beyond just the standard rehab basis. So and then compared to the adult one, that you can't see that line at all, and that's an adult skeleton there. So epiphyseal plate or growth plate is how the bones grow. When we're talking about anatomy, epiphysis contributes to a joint and apophysis contributes to a tenoosseous attachment. So how do bones grow? Well, they grow in length by proliferation of cartilage cells and intercellular matrix, the metaphysis. And then the physis cartilage cells multiply and transform, producing new bone. So in other words, cartilage eventually calcifies and is replaced by bone. In relation to width, they lay down bone on the outer side or subperiosteal surface, and then the bone on the inner side is absorbed. When we're talking about working with young players, we talk about what age are they. And age can be multiple things when we're looking at children. We can have the chronological age, as in their age from the date of birth, or we can have biological or skeletal age. And you can see from the picture that they don't always correspond. We also need to factor in the psychological age. So we're thinking about their emotional, cognitive and psychological maturity. And we'll talk through all of these as we go through this. Is maturation early, 14 years chronologically. If his biological age is within 1 year either side of his chronological age, that's within normal maturation parameters. If it's anything, if it's anything either ahead or behind of that, they're an early or a late maturer respectively. So we need to be thinking about biological and skeletal age when we're designing programs, or also when injuries are presenting to us, that we're not just thinking, oh, average age for this injury is about 9 or 10. Well, actually, it could be a 12-year-old who's coming with that injury, okay? And you can see there as well, within one chronological age band, you could have up to 4 years biologically within your squad. So think about that if you're a coach as well. So a third of players were shown to be outside of normal maturation category in a study at our academy in 2009. There's different maturity rates in different ethnic backgrounds and earlier osseous maturity in female adolescents. So let's look at the growth spurt. In females, it commences around about 9, 10, peaks about 12 and stops when they hit around about 16. They grow around about 5 to 11 centimetres per year. And in males, the growth spurt commences around 10, 11, peaks about 14, stop 15 centimetres a year at height. So we can see that there's this real adolescent pre-growth, taking us into that peak height velocity, this fastest time during adolescence. And then we start growth decelerates until we get into our kind of late teens, early 20s. So how do we assess growth and maturation at the club? Well, we use a non-invasive method of assessment. There's two that you can use. There's Camison Roach or Meerwald. All of these, both of them actually take into account chronological age, height and weight. But then the Camison Roach adds in parental height and the Meerwald adds in sitting height as well. What these do is they provide you with an estimate of peak height velocity. They give you an idea of how tall the player is going to be at the end of it. And we work out maturity offset. So how far away is maturation compared to chronological age? There are some issues with this though. Obviously, it's the parental height provided accordingly. We don't get all the mums and dads in and actually measure them. So we're hoping that they give us the right one. Then also, biologically, we don't actually know, and we're not going to ask the question, is the dad the biological dad? Or with egg donation these days, is the mum the biological mum? So there is some things that you've got to be aware when you're using these. It's also applicable for average maturers only, and it's based on Caucasian middle-class background. So we do need studies with ethnic diversity. What we can do with that, though, is we calculate a graph like this, which gives us an idea where the players are. So on the bottom of the graph, there's all the names of the players. Athletic Development Department do this for us. So we can see if a player's in blue, then before peak height velocity. If they're red, then they're around about 91 to 92% of adult height. And then if they've passed it, they're in green. So what do? We keep a track around that peak height velocity. We also get information to know whether the biological age, where is that in relation to chronological age? Where is that maturation status? So let's look at this. So are these the same or are they different maturation levels? The answer is it depends on where they are in their maturation process. So they could be the exact same age and the exact same height, but if one boy is going to be 170 centimetres end height stature predicted, so 5'6", then he's already achieved 90% of his adult height. The other boy is going to be 100 meters, so about 6'2", and he's still 85%. So he's still got a lot more growing to go. So child A is more physically mature. So how does this affect performance? Well, we get this thing when there's a rapid increase in limb length because of the adolescent growth spurt, and that causes a decline in performance. And it can be motor coordination, it can be proprioception, and this is a period of adolescent awkwardness. And classically, you hear mums come to you, they'll say, oh, it's like Bambi on ice at the minute, and they're probably going through this peak height velocity and a period of adolescent awkwardness. And we know that that's a potential because we've got the ground, know where they are in relation to peak height. So whether you remember, but its legs used to grow really fast. So we can explain to the kids. So the bone grows time to adapt. So then sometimes you'll find that they'll be quite tight in the muscles. So you'll get a pro knee bend on a teenager, and they might be at some points 15 centimetres heel to buttock because they're so tight because they've done a rapid growth. And because of this, they're going to get reduced proprioception. So understanding where the body is in space is going to change. If your hand's here one day and a few weeks later, it's going to change that body map. So it's going to take time to get accustomed to the new body. So that within this period where the brain's kind of recalibrating where the body is in space, there's going to be this temporary decline in motor skills. That's going to lead on the field to performance issues and potential frustration. I've sat on the bench and literally seen a player not know where his feet is. Someone who's been really technically gifted has gone from falling over the football. Okay, so it's really interesting. We sat on the bench and just had goal because we knew that he went through adolescent growth. But the key is, does he understand why his performance has declined? So education of the player and parent is going to be really, really key. Of course, there's some positive effects of maturation. We get strength and power gains with peak strength developing after peak height velocity in both males and females. They're going to get bigger kind of cardiopulmonary and aerobic capacity, and they're going to get speed and power gains. So if all this happens, then really your early maturers are going to be at a competitive advantage. So let's then talk about relative age effect and biobanding. So relative age effect is this phenomenon that there's asymmetries in the distributions of birth dates in professional and youth soccer. So players born earlier in the year are favoured and those born later are discriminated against. And this is independent of the cut-off date. So in the UK, the players who are most likely to get through are those in those early months of September, October, November to December. And in European, where the calendar switches from January to December, it could be your boys in January, February, March, okay? And it's often due to maturation-associated selection. And interestingly enough, relative age effect is found in achievement domains not required physicality. So it's also found in schools, children as well. So is it relative age effect or maturation effect? Well, Johnson suggests that skeletal maturation is more strongly associated with academy selection than birth quarter. And academies tend to favour those born earlier in the selection year to a relatively small degree, in contrast favouring maturing athletes to a much greater extent. So as academy staff, as coaches, as athletic development staff, it's really important that we recognise the difference between relative age effect and maturation effect as well. I'm not going to go into everything on this slide, but it was one that was done by, during his PhD, James Powell, one of our athletic development staff. And he looked at biological maturity and relative age on physical performance, did the tests up there in the right-hand corner. And basically, he was saying that commonly held belief that relatively age effect influences performance is possibly overstated. The only one that it really had an effect on was counter movement jump. Not quite sure why on that one. But maturity status was shown to have a much greater influence and should be accounted for when considering players of the same chronological age. So again, he emphasises that these are two constructs that we need to be aware of. So let's look at performance and talent ID of early maturers. So early maturers, they're going to experience this growth spurt with this adolescent awkwardness and this kind of clumsiness potentially when the training load's lighter. And that means that when decisions are being made about these children, about retention or release, they're hopefully likely to have got past it before they get to that decision. All right. Early maturations, they may use the physical strengths, but they may neglect their technical and tactical physiological skills. So if you had the boys there on the right, if you had the bigger boy and he was playing against lots of boys that were smaller than him physically, he could quite easily kind of knock them off the ball rather than get the ball and play it fast and kind of developing other skills as well. This is then a negative when other players get to the same maturation and they fail to develop some of the skills that the smaller boys may have developed. So let's look at late maturers and performance. Discrimination against these smaller skeletally or less mature players may limit their opportunities. They're a bit less likely to get through unless you're aware of maturation differences. They could be physically disadvantaged and they may struggle to compete when matched against physically more able peers, which you can understand. If small boys against big boys, they're going to get pushed off the ball. So therefore, they may drop out of sport earlier rather than continue until they reach maturity when this disadvantage is overcome. But let's think about it. If really we're saying that skilled players are dispersed across the population, okay, if we only select from that early maturers group, we're really going to miss out on those late maturing players. Okay, so we're going to miss out on some real gems if all we take is the people who are the best at 11, 12, 13, 14, okay, because they're bigger and more physically strong. So actually, if these late maturers actually progress through the system, then it's thought that to survive the actual programme, they must possess or develop exceptional technical, tactical, or psychological attributes. So what about biobanding then? So why don't we just group all the players together in relation to maturation? Well, let's talk about that. Biobanding is exactly that. It's putting people together in relation to maturation. So you might say we'll do an agreed maturation band of 85 to 90%, and we'll play them all together. Seems reasonable. But when you actually look at it and we actually ask the players, or this study actually asked the players at a Premier League tournament, what their experience was of biobanding, I think it's really interesting. Both the early and the late maturers agreed that biobanding created a physically more equal playing field. So the little players are playing against all the little ones, the bigger ones are playing all against people of their own maturation. And it encouraged a style of play that was less physical and more technically and tactically orientated. So that's good, right? So that's a good point. However, the early maturers, they found the games that were more physically challenging because now they're playing against people of their own physical size. And they found that they could use physical attributes to succeed, less physical attributes to succeed and control the game. So now they've really got to work on those technical and tactical aspects. That's great. So they thought, for the early maturers, they quite like these biobanded tournaments. They thought that competing against more physically matched players was a better challenge and a better test of their touching ability. What about the little players? Well, they're used to playing with the big players. So actually, they now find playing against all players of their own maturation, so the smaller players, they now find it less challenging because they're used to competing against the bigger, more mature boys. But they did say in a positive that they have greater opportunity to use and develop technical, tactical and physical competency because they're not going to get knocked off the ball the same. So things like shielding or making challenges. So how do we, at Manchester United, how do we manage all these things around training and physical development? Well, we use a combination. We play chronological age and we play biobanded tournaments for certain weeks throughout the year. But the other key thing is actually the coaches on a week by week basis play players up and down depending on what they want to achieve with that player. And that's really, really important for parents and player education. If we're going to play a child up, I don't think any coach has probably had any parent come and complain to them. If we're going to play a child down, parents want to know why you're playing them down, okay, because they get worried that it means that they're going to be released. Actually, it's a real positive because it means that we're understanding where your son is and we're actually doing the best for him, his physical maturity, what he needs at that specific point. So education's key, and for the children as well. They're going to do general gym robustness programs so that when they're going through these aspects of peak height velocity, we're really working on things like proprioception. The team's going to do regular IDT meetings so everyone's in staff's on the same page, and we're going to consider maturation and date of birth if we're going to release them, so both maturation and relative age. Training around peak height velocity, everyone's got to be aware, and we're doing an individualised approach to the training loads. The other thing as well is we need to consider the external loads to football. So these are going to be your really sporty type children. There's a good chance they're going to be playing another sport outside of football. They're likely to be playing for the school team, maybe a school athletics. So we need to consider all the loads. Doesn't mean that we just reduce, if someone's going through peak height velocity, we don't just reduce the load for everyone, because a high number of these people can get through with no actual issues, no growing pains. So therefore, we don't reduce it for everyone. The key is let the parents know that if they're starting getting any pain, that they come to us and then we can manage all the loads. So we've talked about growing and maturation of the body. Let's look at the adolescent brain. So This, can we just move that a little bit so we can see? So the frontal cortex, it's involved in planning and rational decisions, controlling emotional responses, controlling impulses and problem solving. And adults typically use this. So decisions are made with good sense of judgment and awareness of the consequences, but adolescents are unable to use this properly or consistently. And why is that? Because the teenage brain actually develops from the back to the front. And the frontal lobes are the last to develop. Brain maturation actually occurs around about mid-20s, males and female varies, but that's actually one of the reasons why car insurance is kind of high until you hit that kind of early 20s. Myelin sheaths increase the speed of transmission of information, but in the teenage prefrontal cortex, these sheaths only partially cover neurons. And during teenage years, lots of connections are pruned and others are strengthened, so we're really important in their development. So whilst they're developing, teenagers generally rely on the part of the brain called the amygdala. And this is associated with emotions, impulsive, aggressive, instinctive behaviour or risk-taking. Sound like an adolescent at all? So it's not all negatives around about a developing brain. It is a period of high risk-taking, but there's these exploratory behaviours, and it's usually quite a positive learning environment with positive consequences for learning and social interactions. So these brains are really open to change. So they're ready to learn to and adapt. So it's a real key time for development of self. So Dave started talking a little bit before about this team and the athlete-centered approach and the interdisciplinary team. So we're going to look at that now. So at United, we have this collaborative interdisciplinary approach to player development. We have defined roles, but appreciation of others' skills. And the parent, when you're working with young people, is going to be key in this kind of circle. In an athlete-centered approach, the needs of the athlete are placed before the interests and pressures imposed by the club, school, parents, or coach. So it's about what the athletes needs at that time. It's not about, do we have our best players for playing in the next game if someone's struggling. Okay. So in an athlete-centered approach, we want players to be empowered and engaged in their own development, want them to develop solutions to enhance performance. This increases motivation. And it's about planning for long term, even if it means accepting short-term setbacks. So it is really about the long term. But that doesn't mean that it's about letting players do what they want, and it's not about letting players be undisciplined. But as IDT members, we need to facilitate opportunities for player development, and that'll be within your coaching sessions, within your athletic development, within your physio sessions, for self-evaluation and reflection, ownership, problem solving, decision making, goal setting and goal achievement. So if as a team we haven't got a win at all cost mentality, how do we define success? So success as a team is to support the evolving needs of the player at each stage of their development. It's about them. It's not about the team specifically in relation to we just need the best players to win. It's not about that. So we want to really facilitate each player to reach their maximum potential. So we have lots of meetings and we discuss each player individually to see what they need. And it's not just about developing players. If we're going to have really good academy, we need to put kind of input into developing staff as well. So at Manchester United, we worked really hard over the years to develop kind of an induction procedures. We put physios on courses, so ITMI for ATMI for the first aid courses for the FA. And we do regular training, so twice a year we'll get all the physios in, we'll train pitch side competencies. We also upskill our coaches. So if you're working at a club, have you thought about speaking to your coach? Because realistically, you're not going to be the one pressing the chest if you need to manage an airway. Your coaches are going to be pressing the chest or potentially putting the defib on while you're managing everything else if you're on your own, all right? So upskilling coaches is going to be really important. At United, we do rotations. So physios can get periods on rehab or match day. So they get a real broad kind of area of everything. We don't just put them on match day rotations, and we skill mixed staff. Dave alluded to these kind of hats that you wear as a physio. And it is so important that you have kind of understanding of everyone else's skills, because the one place that you're going to get it is when you're on tournament. When you're in the big leagues that Dave's been in at first team level, you may be taking these type of staff with you. I can tell you when you're in an academy setting, you're going to take a medical staff, a few coaches, and if you're lucky, you're going to take someone from pastoral care. So it's going to be you they're going to be looking to in a breakfast before a game. What can I eat? Can I have bacon and eggs? Can I have a sausage? What can I have? So you need to know. It's going to be you guys who's going to be picking them up if they've just lost a game or they're upset or they're homesick. You're going to have to be doing that. When you're travelling with teams, you've got to think of all the pastoral care things as well. It's the physio who's going to carry the sun cream. Didn't think about that when you're in your degree, did you? And it's even things like thinking about, can you drink the water from the hotel? Are you going to have enough bottled water? We're going to Slovakia. This picture was from Slovakia, and it was minus whatever. But we had to take sun cream because there's a period where we're going up a mountain and the UV is going to be really high. So that really overwise understanding of where you're going, and emergency action plans in advance is going to be key. Even things like, if you've taken kids away, have you checked that the hotel minibar is empty or they can't access it? Because you really don't want to be making that phone call home to parents, do you? Or balconies are shut and their windows are shut if they're younger children, unlocked. Wherever we go in the world, we do emergency action plans for that trip so that hopefully we can use that next year and kind of amend it and work towards it. And it's not just the full-time staff that go away, the casual staff do go away as well on trips and tournaments. So it's their responsibility if they go to do an emergency action plan, because then it gives them an understanding of what it takes to kind of actually write them as well. It's really good for their development. So the last part really is just about physiotherapy in an academy setting. So if I show you something like this, so principles of physio, so we have our phases, we have a graduated load, and we have a criteria-based approach which guides the transitions between the phases. It's goal-orientated, considers healing times, considers functional capacity, and individualised, all right? But you know all that. So tonight what I want to talk about is what's the secret sauce? What's all the extra bits that we do when we're talking about rehabbing a young player that's not you don't get from your physio books? And I think it comes down to this. We have a real child-centred assessment. We try and not over-medicalise children. We always want the environment to be safe. Communication is going to be key throughout. And we want to teach the children to have ownership and empowerment and engagement. We want to try and motivate them. We're going to try and make things functional. And if we can, we're going to try and make things fun as well. But throughout all of that, we're going to try and develop people. So club values of developing people is going to run throughout everything. So let's talk about the physio assessment. Subjectively, young children may not offer information up as freely. If you're dealing with an adult and you say to them, how's your back pain? They'll generally tell you when it started, what investigation they've had and how it is now. A child, you may have to use more closed-ended questions. And I find sometimes if you give them a timeline and say, when did your pain start, like a verbal timeline, because if they say to you, oh, it's ages ago it started, and you pin them down, it could be 7 to 10 days ago, and that's ages when they're 9, 10 or 11. Also, have they done something that they might be fearful of getting in trouble for? Is there something else going on? These are some of the things that we found over the time. During lockdown, we had a kid with back pain because he'd spent all day sitting on chemistry stools because of COVID. We generally find that they'll come in and they've got flare-ups because literally they are playing every sport. And it's great. We want them to play multi-sports. We really do, as long as their body can cope with it. Okay. If it's not, then we need to look at amending. We've had kids come in with back pain, and when you actually speak to them, it's been the birthday on the Friday, and they've literally played their game all weekend, and by Monday morning, they've got a sore back, because actually when you speak to them, they've been lying in an odd position. We had one child who had coccyx pain. I'm obviously a bit concerned, why has a child got coccyx pain? So I got called over and we were chatting to him. Oh, have you had a nice weekend then? Yeah, I've been skiing, I've been sledging in Wales. So literally spent the whole weekend sledging in Wales, and that therefore kind of explains why he's got a coccyx. But when you said to him, have you injured it? Have you done anything? No. Okay, so you're going to have to go a little bit deeper with these. Information from the parent. Is the parent going to be present at assessment? Ideally, yes, but it is a bit difficult in times of COVID. But if you're going to deal with a head injury or a return to play, you definitely need to be picking up whatever age that child is, if they're a child, picking up and speaking to the parent to see if they've got any concerns as well. You may get information from the IDT. Has someone been an eyewitness? Is there video analysis? Is there any other factors? So have they all of a sudden had a really bad part of the game and suddenly the Osgood or the Severs has flared up, but actually later that day, oh, it's the final, we've got through to the final, I feel all right, Diane, can I go and play? All right, yeah, you can. So other things that are going on. And have they attended the physio room lots? Whenever you're working with children, you need to make sure that the tools that you're using are appropriate to children. So an example is when you're talking to young children with Severs, and we might say to them, so nothing's no pain and 10's the worst pain imaginable. So if you're not familiar with Severs, it's growing pains around the heel, happens kind of in the younger age groups, really, often like your 10, 11-year-olds. And you ask them how much is it out of 10, and they generally go, about 7. So you're thinking if a shark's ripping your arm off, that's 10, but your heel pain's around about 7. Okay, normal. Okay. And I think it's generally because they probably haven't got much of a concept about what pain is. This is probably one of their first musculoskeletal injuries. So it interested me to see whether it's actually, is it reliable and valid for working with children, young children? And it is. So numerical pain rating scale is and visual analog scale. If you're going to use other things within your career, so outcome measures, Ottawa knee rules, Pittsburgh knee rules, you need to make sure that you know whether it's valid for children that you're working with. Dave alluded to it as well about avoiding over-medicalisation of players. So we have all this kit at United. We have ultrasounds, MRIs, even CT scans, but we really don't over-refer players to these. So we only use when they're clinically indicated. Same thing with taping. You won't see us put in lots and lots of different types of tape all over the young players, because really what we want them to do is we want to not create dependency on these tapes. We want them to go through to professional phase without all these kind of things in the head that you have to have this tape or that tape. Now that doesn't mean that we don't use tape if someone's going back after a lateral ankle sprain. Yes, we will use like a basket weave or something when they're going back. So we do use it when clinically needed, but we don't just put tape on just for the sake of putting tape on. And therefore we need a consistent approach between physios, and we have things like tape and technique booklets for that. Safe environment. If you're going to work with young players, safeguarding is going to be absolutely key. So you're going to have to know your local policies and procedures. If your club doesn't offer training, the FA does, you can access them. Can't emphasize enough having a chaperone when you're working with young players. You know, you might think that you're no risk to them. You know, some of the boys that I work with, twice as fast as me and twice as tall almost, you know, but that doesn't matter. They're still a minor, and you've got to not just protect them, you've got to protect yourself as well. So having a chaperone is so important. We need to be aware of non-accidental injuries. So players who are coming in, kind of bruises on their arms, scratches on the face, potentially. You know, if you're working with female athletes, inside of the thighs, we need to be looking out for these and knowing where to flag them. So do you know the referral pathways at your club? Do you know who your safeguarding officer is? If you're really worried, obviously, if you didn't have one of those, you'd bring the police. And this is where record keeping, something can come back to you years later, or we found out now that there's abuse. Can we come back and look at your medical notes? So honestly, record keeping is so important. Don't get bogged down with making friends with children on Facebook, even your under 18s, be very, very careful. If you're working kind of professional phases, just don't go there. It just opens a massive bag of worms. And also things like being careful with just who do you contact. So we always contact the parent. Even if the player rings me for whatever reason, I have to then ring the parent and say, do you know that the players rang me to protect them? It's a few bits of information there if you don't have a child protection in place at your club that you can find out. And then communication, really. Making sure communication is age appropriate, and we use lots of visual aids in communicating and confirming understanding. So if you said to a player, can you explain your injury to me? Or you said, and then they can repeat it back, that's great. If you say to someone, any questions, generally they'll go, no, because it's automatic, isn't it? If someone says to you, any questions, it's kind of an automatic no. So if you take nothing away from tonight, try this. Next time you're asking someone what questions, Ask them, what questions do you have? Not, do you have any questions? And you'll really see the mind ticking over, because it's much more of an inviting statement to ask them about questions. So when we talked about the developing brain, we talked about this adolescence being a key time for development. So do children believe that pride in them is based on what they do or is who they are? So this is a nice little book if you want a little bit of reading, or the website there. And it talks about children believing that parental pride based on results is more likely to believe that they have to be good at something to make someone happy. So therefore, their self-worth as a child is not in who they are, but in what they do. So as clinicians working with children, we need to value effort and not only attainment. So we value creativity and not just the goal. You need to think about your psychological maturation when we're communicating with them. It's very easy to have, this was our under 14s a few weeks ago at Bisham Abbey. You have the tallest boy come in and see you, and yeah, he's really a lot taller than me. It's as though you're talking to a grown man in relation to stature. His mind's still processing like the age that he is. When you see the younger boy coming in front of you, you're more likely to speak to him as a young child because he physically looks like a young child. So just being aware that just because someone's maturation is the 6 foot odd at 14, it really doesn't mean that the mind's processing like one. If a kid's come into the treatment room all the time, or I remember one kid and he'd come up and he'd said, oh, someone stood on my foot, and I had a look at him. I'm like, no, you're fine. You can go back training. His foot must have literally hit the bottom step. He'd come back up to physio. Oh, my back's a bit sore. Right, okay, red flag now. Okay, what's going on with this kid? Okay, he came in with a very, very small injury. Now he's coming back to me. So we need to be aware, is it a performance issue? Are they being bullied? Is a parental issue putting pressure on? Are they really nervous about an upcoming game or tournament? Like I said, suddenly heel pain comes on at the start of the tournament because they don't want to play in the first game. By the last one, when they get through, they're all keen to train. It can also be a challenge when contracts are ending and you're rehabbing players, you know, for getting them back as well. Some children find that difficult. I want to put it to you now, if you're having the best night of your life and you bang your knee, okay, you're going to rub your knee and you're going to get on with it because you're having a great time. All right. If you have the same injury, the same bang to your knee, but you're having a terrible day, how does that injury feel? It feels much more different, doesn't it? So how you're feeling emotionally really influences your perception of pain as well. And it's no different with the kids. Parental education is really important. Like we said before, we do a lot of online tools that we developed during COVID with the parents. Prior to COVID, I would always make sure that I would go for coffees upstairs in the parents' lounge and not just go into the coach's room, because I could get lots of them little tidbits of information. Oh, as such a body comes to talk to you about his knee. Oh, I need some new insoles for my son. All those little bits and nuggets that you get from just being around the parents. And now we're doing that in car parks. So physically making sure that I'm walking out onto the car park and taking one of the players back to the parents, and then kind of just hanging around a little bit and just seeing whether any parent wants to grab you. Communication in COVID times is a challenge in itself. The masks, we lose a lot of interpersonal communication. We lose a lot of facial expressions. So sometimes I have to say to the kids, pull my mask on and say, can you tell that I'm smiling, or can you tell that I'm teasing you? Okay. And this rule really, 7% of communication is verbal, 38% is voice tone, and 55% is body language. So let's hope we don't go back into another national lockdown. But if we end up back in a lockdown and we end up back on Zoom doing rehab, then we need to remember that we're going to have to verbalise a lot more because people can't pick up information from other ways. Ownership and empowerment. I'm going to take you back to your childhood days again now. So imagine you're sat at the beginning of your summer holidays, okay, and you've got 6 or 7 weeks in front of you. How long does that feel? Forever, doesn't it? All right, it feels like forever. You're going to be off forever. So you've got a young boy and you're sitting there and telling him that he's going to be out for potentially 3 months after a fracture. That is going to feel like forever if 6 weeks feels like forever. So you're going to have a plan at the beginning of this rehab to get him through the next 3 months. So how do we engage the player? Well, we're going to try and keep them involved with the team throughout the rehab. We're going to try and facilitate about learning about the body and confirm their understanding. We're going to provide rationale and feedback. I'm going to really early involve other ID team members, might be psychology, might be nutritionists, but really importantly, the coaches, getting the coaches involved so the player still feels part of it. Parents are going to be included, as we've said before. And depending on the age of the child, we're going to try and keep things visual and relatable. So one of the physios used, where are you in relation to getting back from your power pack on form? Peer support, we might ask them, do they want to go and speak to a player who's either been out for a long time or for a similar injury? And throughout the rehab, we're going to offer them opportunities for independent work. And if they've been out a long time, we might offer them a sweetener. So that might be going visiting Old Trafford, or if there's first team around, getting a first teamer to come and speak to them. Or during lockdown, we got their first teamers to do little videos, and then we sent them to the players just so that they knew that kind of it was being monitored. And even the first team goalkeeping coaches, I was rehabbing a goalkeeper for a very long time over the first national lockdowns, and he just did a video as well, just to say that it'd been fed back to him that the kid was working really hard. We're going to set them short and long-term challenges. So let's talk about ownership. We talk about ownership, we talk about, is it true or is it perceived ownership? So true ownership is basically, we're doing an end stage session, give me a shoot and drill, whatever they give me, we're going to do it, because I'm not worried that there's any limitation to them physically. Most often than not, we do a lot of perceived ownership. So imagine someone's coming in for a lower limb injury. We might say to them, okay, what uppers do you want to do today? Give me some uppers. But it might be that actually the balance that they've got or is not quite right, or they're giving you the same that we've done the last session. So you might say, well, what about this? Or do you know any other muscles that we're working? If we're working triceps, do you know what the muscle at the front's called? Do we know any exercises for that? So they feel like they've kind of been a big influence in that rehab program, but actually it's perceived because really they're only doing what you're happy with as well. We have lots of teachable moments during rehab. So we know that rehab doesn't always go as planned. So resilience, teaching them that they can't control what's happened to them, but they can control their attitude. And if you can do that in life, I think you'll be all right. And then motivation and discipline. So motivation is doing things when you want. Discipline's doing things when you don't. All right. No one's going to make you get up and go out on that run on a cold morning. For us as adults, that's your discipline. We try and make things function as possible, from load, volume, intensity, duration, technical, cardiorespiratory. But we try and make it developmentally appropriate. Don't feel pressure just to do whatever exercise you've just seen on Twitter or Insta because it looks good. All right. It's still got to be developmentally appropriate for the child. We make rehabilitation position specific, and we work a lot with the coach or athletic development when we're looking at these end stage transitions. So really transitioning people from rehab to that kind of return to training, return to play, and then return to performance or competition. And it's really a multi-decision from the athlete to the healthcare professional, and the players are important in that decision making as well. We're going to try and make it fun if we can. So find fun for the player. If you've got an under 16 player, you might say to me, Di, can I come in early, get my rehab done? I'll leave and watch the game. Yeah, brilliant, of course you can. The younger, we might get people working together or even against each other, might have teams. Major incentives or forfeits, okay? If you miss the basket, you get 5 press-ups. Or just general games as well. So we try and keep things as interactive as we can. Throughout it, we've got to have club philosophies and values. So many children that we work with throughout our careers are not going to make it to Premier League footballers, not even going to make it as full-time footballers. So we really need to make sure that time that's spent with us is value added in relation to personal and social development, giving them time management skills. So they've got to be on time, they've got to be 5 minutes early when we're meeting for tours and tournaments. Integrity, how many reps have you just done? I know I've just counted that they've done 9, and they might say 10. You're like, oh, no, I know you did 9. Okay, so integrity, resiliency, respect, and to always work hard. Little examples of how we do that. So on tour, from being a very young age, you have to stand up, present a pennant to someone who's helped us and do a little speech of thanks. They might get to do, and this was on the tour, we were in Boston, and they give the players the task of doing some tactics for the game for the next day. When they did the tactics in the game and they actually scored a goal, the team just absolutely went because they actually made that tactics, not the coach, right? And we try and do cultural experiences. So we went to Venice playing a tournament. Of course, we're going to take them in a gondola. We're going to go and see the player, see the place as well. Custodians of club cultures and values. Not every player comes to the club with the same values of what constitutes socially acceptable behaviour. People come from all different backgrounds. So we need a philosophy that sets the standard, and values are upheld both on and off the pitch, and that includes rehab. Finally, when working in youth sport, you must remember the following. The medical team must ensure long-term development takes precedence over any external or internal pressures and short-term gains. So it really is about the long term, not just about the next game. And finally, kids will be kids. Expect them to make mistakes. You can do the best rehab program in the world, and then they'll come in and the worst, and you look down at the knees and they've got dirty knees and they've been playing in the playground. So rehab is a learning opportunity. Just before I finish the show, I did some chapters in a book that's been out for the last year. Don't get any money for it. Don't get any. But just if you're interested, or you want to work in sport, or you want any more information about injuries that have in sport, I can point you that way. So in summary, those working in academies require a clear understanding of a child-centred assessment, and they really need to understand growth and maturation. By encouraging players to take ownership and an active approach in the rehab, we aspire that this will have a positive effect on further rehab as part of their adult career. And then I really do think we'll have the secret sauce to paediatric rehab. Okay. And I guess I should ask, what questions do you have?
Guys, to hold your questions, we've got time at the end. We'll do a joint Q&A
Yeah.
with the both of you. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Because we're struggling a little bit on time. And we'll get this going nice and quickly, Dave. Have you got your clicker?
Yeah.
Good stuff. There you go, mate. Okay. Jump start. Yeah, off you go. Thank you.
Right, round two.
Obviously, for the people who didn't hear before, my name's Dave Fevre. Thank you very much, Steriplast, UA92, and everybody else for inviting me here. I tried to set it a little bit, obviously, on a James Bond theme. No Time to Die. Well, obviously, in the summer, we saw quite a serious injury that made people realise that you can actually die on a pitch if things aren't done appropriately. So let's take the subject of No Time to Be Injured. Prequel and sequel is included in this box set, trust me. Okay, and very nicely, Mr. Cantona decided to do a bit of a poster for 007. So it fitted in very well with what I was doing. And just a little story on this gentleman. Some of you might not remember this. So some of you might not remember that. You're obviously probably too young to do it. And I was fortunate enough to be at that game and when that happened. And what you don't know, the inside story is that when Eric was sent off, the gaffer decided that somebody needed to supervise him. And our kit man, Norman Davis, God rest his soul, who was about 75 when this happened, was sent somebody down to touchline sales partner. Whatever you do, look after Eric. That was he got told. So you can imagine we're going down the tunnel, Eric's been red carded, he's come through kick the supporter, we draw the game 1-0, the dressing rooms at Sellers Park are not the biggest, all right, and Eric's sat in the far corner. So I decided, I'm getting in the dressing room, I need to keep well out of the way because the gaffer's going to blow me. And Roy walked in, and Roy had to go at the lads, the gaffer walked in, moaned about the result, moaned about what happened with Eric, looked at Eric, and turned 180 degrees and looked at the 75-year-old kid and went, what the fuck are you doing? Let Eric jump in the crowd. that time. One of the most common questions I get asked in terms of working in sport is, who makes the final decision in terms of when the player's fit? Is it the player, is it the physio, or is it an interlinked manager? It becomes a two-way role, effectively. My job is to try and prove to the player if he's fit or not fit, so that when we go back to the manager, then basically what we can do is we can communicate in terms of what's going on, and then we can say, look, the player telling me not fit. So it's a joint decision. It's up to me to make the player realise he's not good enough, or not fit enough to play in the game. All right, it's not that reliability in terms of, oh, well, I want to play, the gaffer's going to play. The managers will always play the play, but my job is to try and prove to the player you're not fit enough to be able to play. And in that situation, I've been out again, I can't do this, so I'm not fit. That makes the decision easy. And that's probably the most common question I get asked in terms of making that decision. So I will try and prove to it. There are players who are very mentally strong, and in those individuals, you will know them, I will know them, the manager will know them. From that point of view, what we'll then try and do is make sure that we use that to our advantage if we need to. So that's probably the most key thing. So I've got to try and prove to the player what can he do functionally, physically, in terms of making that decision and making those decisions in terms of what we do. And as we walk off before we see the manager, we'll have a discussion and we'll go, what do you think? How do you feel it? And I'm playing against the player, it's really quick. Sancho, I'm not going to struggle with the defender. That's what I'm after. So when we get into the manager, the players already telling the guy. So it makes it easier from my point of view. Okay, so we count down to the game. And obviously, once we're in the game, it's nice and easy. There's not a lot to do. I'm sat there watching the game. And in that situation, it's important that we don't switch off. All right? We've already talked about the qualifications. And some of you have obviously done the FA stuff in terms of level 4 out there. Some of you might go with the league, but I work with the league as well in terms of teaching on their level 5. And again, this gives you license to be involved in medical team at level 4. But if you're level 5, then you are going to lead the team. All right, so you've got to basically, if you're going to lead that level 5, you are going to have to be in a situation where what you do is that you're able to run that team. So if I'm there and Diane's there and you're in charge of me and Diane, and you'll go, oh dear, you're faculty members and I'm trying to tell you what to do. No, that's what we need to see at that level. So that it needs that ability to be able to control your team. If you're at level 4, then you're working within the team. So if we're telling you what to do, I need a team that can support me in terms of what I'm doing. And the most important tool you've got, you already have as physio, sports therapist, rehabilitator, whatever. It's your eyes. It's that visual input and being able to see what's going on. All right, our most important tools as physios, obviously our eyes and our hands. It doesn't matter about MRI scanners or ultrasounds or everything else. It's those other skills you've got that will make the difference. You see a picture there, and you sat on the touchline and you look at that, and some of you will see certain things. And then when you look at it again, some of you will see that. And some of you probably didn't notice that because you're too busy looking at something else that was in the centre of the picture. All right, but that's what we're looking for. We're looking for that dilemma that occurs in that situation. Obviously, we see situations like this, which is not what everybody wants to see, but this happens in real life. This does happen. And some of you will say, yeah, but how often does it happen to you? Well, I've been doing this job 30 odd years, and for 30 odd years, I never had a cardiac arrest. My season, I had cardiac arrest. All right, not me personally, but one involved in a game Tuesday night in Salford. Ironically, being here as well, the people who run this place were playing at Salford. We had a player with a cardiac issue. We had the same issue 2 weeks later in a hotel. All right. So you think it's never going to happen to you. And at the end of the season last year, I spoke to the people at Barrow and I said, the two sports therapists and the rehabilitator, I said, you know what? It's been a great year, you know, because we've experienced something that I've never experienced before. Dealing with a cardiac arrest in a lad who's 23 years old, who's very fit, who I've known since he was 8 years old because he was at Blackburn with me as an academy player. Had all the screening in the world, but has had an issue in terms of his cardiac thing so much that he's had to retire within 7 weeks of it happening. So that can happen to you even in sport. So these are the high profile ones I put on the screen. Obviously the one that we dealt with was very different. What was our EAP in the hotel? Diane mentioned about this when you're traveling. We had an EAP in that situation. I'm not going to go into details, but it's really important you do that. I've worked with a manager who would drink 2 bottles of red wine every night, would ring me up at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, I've got chest pain. And I made sure that I had a key to his room, a defib and everything else. And I knew my medical team were on the same floor. Because if it kicked off and he was going to have a cardiac arrest, we'd be the ones that have to deal with it on the 20th floor of a hotel. I'm not waiting for the kit man to go down to the coach to find the defib. It's in my room because I'm next door to the gaffer. And it's my responsibility. That's my job. That's important. We talk about football and people say, oh, yeah, it's a contact sport. Football is not a contact sport. Strictly to come dancing is a contact sport. Football is a collision sport. People are running to each other and they are colliding. They are not able to control it, unlike Strictly. All right? So it's very different. So we have to be ready for that situation. And in terms of our players, what's the easiest thing to treat? A player who's unconscious, i.e. like the one on the right side, or a player who's with it? Well, give me that anytime over that. Because if your player's with it and wants to carry on, it becomes a dilemma. Because he's arguing with you, the manager wants him to carry on, the fans are on your back, it might be parents who want to carry on or not carry on. There's all sorts of issues. If the player's unconscious, you've got complete control. As long as you know what you're doing, you can deal with it. That's easy. Now, some of you, that might frighten you. If you're in front of 80,000 and you've got all the Sky TV cameras and all the eyes in the world are watching you with that, you just follow the procedure. It's actually quite laid back about it. It's quite straightforward as long as you follow what's in front of you and you don't panic and you follow the set pattern that you've been taught. So that's the important bit from a trauma side. And that's the bit that freaks some people out in terms of doing our jobs. All right. Yeah, we come through our qualifications as physios and sports therapists in terms of what we're doing, but it's important we do that. So that's important. Okay, so in terms of that, what we deal with the injury, how we run the medical team is really important and how we deal with that when it's coming off. What I would hope you do, you look at that slide and we haven't got time to go through all the points, but that's a very famous player playing in Spain. And I could probably, Diane would probably look at that and we'd go, you know what, there's probably about a dozen things wrong with that. And that's in the top league in Spain. And that shows you the medical difference in terms of what's going on. So don't think that the big leagues have got it right. And in certain situations, all right, things can go off, players can get upset by things can make this happen. So again, you've got to be aware of what the dangers are in terms of that situation. In terms of our ability to rehabilitate that player, we have to look at various things in terms of our ability to look at return to work. Because don't forget, some of the players we work with still work for a living. I don't always work with full-time, so they still got to go back to their job. Okay, we need to make a diagnosis, and in our rehabilitation thing, let's have a look at the three phases. And I always divide it into three phases. In terms of maximum protection, so immediately after the injury, moderate protection when we're starting to get it going, and minimum protection when we're ready to get them back to go back and play. And that's how I break that down in terms of my rehabilitation stuff. We have to remember, and we talked about the early slides about having all the equipment. We all work in different environments. All right. Some departments I've worked in, and I like to challenge myself. I've worked at the lower end of rugby league, top end of rugby league, lower end of football, top end of football. So we are technologically limited in some situations. So it's all about your clinical skills. All right. Your eyes and your hands are the key factors. People say, what course should I go on? Manual therapy. Be all and end all. Doesn't have a 3-pin plug on it and it never leaves you. So wherever I go, I've got those clinical skills. So that's the massive thing in terms of where you are. So your clinicians and your level of clinicians is really important. Sports like rugby league at the moment are struggling because they're bringing in people with very little experience because they're only prepared to pay small amount of salaries. You can earn more working on the NHS and you've got guaranteed hours. So that's an important thing that you find in a lot of sports now. Since lockdown, contracts are not widely available. There's a shortage of staff. We're not paying decent money because there's financial, considerations to be had in sport, and that can be a problem. Obviously, we can work in environments where we have all the machinery in the world, but we only fill it with people who've got very little experience, and that's where that becomes a problem. So the different environments we work in will give us different challenges. When I'm teaching people will tell me that they're working at Bacup Borough or they're working at Chorley and it's difficult. We've not got this, we've not got that. You know what? I would turn it the other way around. I would go, what an opportunity. Because you are on your own. And if you don't sort it out, it'll sink. I was at Lee Rugby and we had nothing. And I learned more in that time at Lee Rugby in 5 years than I worked when I was at United or Blackburn, etc. So that's the important thing, because you've got to do it. If you don't do it, nobody else will do it. So there's times when you will be on your own. You think, shit, what happens if this happens? How do I control an EAP? How do I control a cardiac arrest with 2 other people? You know, we go on the courses and we teach it when there's 8 and 9 in your medical team. And you're thinking, that doesn't really happen in a lot of situations. I'm on my own. I've got one other person. What's my plan if that kicks off? How do I deal with it? Because I'm going to be responsible for it if that happens. So you've got to deal with what's there and take that advantage in terms of what you do. I've been very lucky. I've worked in the fantasy world where there's been no limitations on my time, things I've needed and so on. So I realise that some of you might go, yeah, but the world you've worked in, it's not quite as easy, you know, as for us. I get that. I totally get it. All right. You know, I said before about my wife treats 20 patients in a day. I treat 1. Where does that work out? You know, you look at each other's different mentalities there. How do you motivate yourself? Because that's key. Because if you can't motivate yourself going to work every day. So I learned many years ago, each beginning of each season, I would write down 5 values I think I've got in myself. This is my self-criticism of myself. So I will pin this on the wall where I'm working and people come in and go, what's all that about? Is that what we're doing today? So these are my 5 present ones. And I had a player walk into me the other week. I said, I think you've got that wrong. What do you mean? I said, well, about me, it's not about you. No, you've made a spelling mistake. I said, where? I said, that one there. You've been proactive. I said, no, I don't. Because sometimes to get some of you to do some work, I have to kick off. I have to be provocative. So I'll go with younger staff. And if we've got a player that's not toeing the line, it's not got a discipline to work, I might have to go in and create a bit of an issue, all right, to get them to get annoyed with me, to make them angry, to work hard. And you're all sat there thinking, Christ, they're getting paid 50 grand a week and they don't want to work hard. It happens, trust me, all right? So I've got to go in and pick the battle at the right time. So part of my probably experience is knowing when to pick a fight with somebody to get them to work hard. And other players, you'll come in and you need to put your arm around them. So it's a little bit different to Di's world in terms of working with players, because we need players to do the job for us on the pitch. That's what the important key issue is. So I would always say, look, set yourself 5 values, look at them, reassess them each year. Are they the same 5 I would have done 5 years ago? No. Would they have been 10 years ago? No. That's just changed as time's gone on. All right. So that's what I would try and say to do. When we're looking at rehab, where does it start? Well, sometimes it starts before we go to surgery. Obviously, if we've got a planned operation, then we might be doing preparation work, which obviously is really important because it makes things better and easier quicker. You know, I'm having an operation in a week's time. I want a week's holiday. No, I don't know. All right. Let's get some work done before you go. That's important. What do I base my rehabilitation on? These are my 5 key areas, all right, that I look at in terms of rehabilitation. So mobility, stability, control, mobility, load and skill. Those are your 5 key factors in terms of rehabilitation. Exercise, some of you might not realize, is now classified as a medicine. Okay. So when we look at our situation in terms of normal healthy tissue and untrained athletes, 50% of 1 RM is what we're looking at in that situation. If we're working with injured human tissue, we're looking at different values. 40%. The fragile nature of injured tissue, all right, you only need a 2% change in load to give you that problem. And the 3 most important things that people forget. I was taught the overload principle many years ago by some very eminent physios, and I ask people now when I'm teaching, do you know what the overload principle is? And they go, I haven't got a clue. What is it? All right. Intensity, frequency, duration. I go into various clubs and players and so on, and they'll show me programs I'm doing. How long have you had the program? Oh, about 6, 7, 8 weeks. How on earth are we going to get fitter and stronger by keeping the same program for 6 or 7 weeks? Oh, well, I've got a program I do every single day. Give me strength. Every single day we do the same program. How can we possibly create mechanotransduction? How can we make tissue come under stress by doing the same load every single day? Because we've got it off the internet. It's easy. I've got an ACL injury, and this is my biggest bugbear when I'm lecturing to doctors and GPs. Yeah, I've been on the internet and I found an ACL program perfect for the player. What a load of rubbish. All right. You've got to do things that's personalized. You've got to assess the player and see what the needs are, what the demands are. Look at the players that I showed you before, the different heights and strengths. We can't possibly expect the same program to work for every single athlete. So you have to go out of your way and produce something that's customized for each individual in the ideal world. All right. And I'm lucky enough to work in the ideal world. So intensity free, what do we change every 2 weeks to give us some actual moving forward stages? We have to change those 3 factors. Because if we don't, we're treading water. Oh yeah, I've been out 6 weeks. I've done the same program for 6 weeks. I'm ready to go back and play. All right. It doesn't work like that. That's why people break down. Take this graph here. All right. Maximum voluntary contraction. All right. Bottom left-hand corner. So if we're going to stimulate normal healthy tissue, if I'm going to go to the gym tonight on my way home, I can train 80% maximum voluntary contraction to give me some response. Untrained tissue, so people who don't train, you only need the 50% to give you some effect. Injured tissue, 40%. Think about that. It's a really important slide because we're going to look at programs that we're going to give to people and we'll base it on what we do. And you think, Christ, 85% will be great. If you're injured, you're going to get a flare up. All right, you'll see in my last couple of slides why that can become a problem. What you've got to realize, 2 most important quotes I've ever learned. Muscle strength decreases by 2 to 6% for the first 8 days of immobilization. I've been working with a player who's been in a splint for 6 weeks, and you wonder what strength issues there's going to be. Somebody who has a fracture. Yeah, we're not going to put a pin down the centre. We're going to stick it in plaster for 12 weeks. You're dealing with all sorts of issues there. You've got joint issues, mobility issues, strength issues. If we can get decent fixation, we can get it going. We can keep that strength up. So that's really important. Muscle strength increases by over 40% over a 6-week period. Somebody will go to the GP today. Oh, you have 6 weeks off. Don't do anything for 6 weeks. We're battling now. We're creating another problem because then they go back to the surgeon again. Yeah, it's a lot better, but I've lost 40% of my strength, at least. How quickly do you get it back? Whatever the period of immobilization is, multiplied by 3. So if you have 6 weeks in the splint, all right, it's going to take you a minimum of 18 weeks to get that back. Now, you find me somebody who's not a full-time athlete who can put 18 weeks of solid work in to get strength back. All right, it's difficult. All right, it doesn't happen. I get so many letters from people who write to me and go, I've had an ACL done. I've been out 2 years now and I'm not back playing yet. And yet I've seen you've had a player that's come back after sort of 5.5, 6 months. These players are training every single day, 8 hours a day. That's the difference where somebody who wants to train once or twice a week because of the job, because of family, get it. So that's important. Quickly going through these phases, because I think we're under a bit of time constraint. So in our maximum protection phase, when we first get the injury, we've had surgery, we're doing very acute, very simple stuff. We're trying to get range of motion. We're trying to reduce inflammation. All right. And we're trying to prevent inhibition. That's really, really important. So we're going to do simple things. We're going to use ice. We're going to use various methods of treatment in terms of trying to make sure we don't aggravate things, but we get things going. We're keeping that neural mechanism going to allow us then to build onto that early platform. We're trying to get mobility back. All right. It's really important we get mobility back within an injury. And often we neglect that. The easiest way to remember that is like, if we don't own those doors for 2 years, they get rusted up and we spray WD-40 into it. It's exactly the same thing in the human body. You're putting synovial fluid into articular cartilage, which is living tissue. So we need mobility. Really important. In the moderate protection phase, let's protect the repaired tissue. Let's restore that range of motion. All right. Let's make sure we get a normal gait and we increase strength as we go on. And we try and produce work in terms of controlled joint stabilizers. All right. So whether it be stabilizers or movers, we can work on it and we can work in simple patterns. I remember years ago, Arsene Wenger coming up with a very interesting quote. It's obviously a few years ago because Ian Wright was still playing. And he said, yeah, Ian Wright's had an injury and we're going to send him to France for revolutionary new treatment. So I'm thinking, I'm into this. What's this revolutionary new treatment? It was using medicine balls. Now, my tutors who taught me would turn in their graves if they knew that was revolutionary new treatment, because that's been around donkeys of years, all right? And I still obviously use it now. But in terms of that, things come around in fashion. You see that in exercise. There's fashionable changes in terms of what's going on. So what we've got is important. When we get to stage 3, we've got full range, we're pain-free. We're trying to look at strength in terms of various planes of movement. So when we're doing that, we're going to move on. I'm going to flick through these fairly quick. So I know again we're going to control, kept under pressure. So in terms of loading our hip joint, how do we progress it? And we can obviously change that in terms of our starting positions. Okay. And we can take that from there. And obviously, once we've got various facilities, then we can do various things in terms of pool therapy, working on sand pits, working in astroturf, and the gym to try and help us. So once we've got to that, and we've got certain movement levels, the fitness levels, then we can move it on. So I see this key word being used a lot of the time: return to play, return to play. Let's have a little bit more thought about this, because if we look at our athletes, you know, I've done a bit of work in Gaelic football over in Mayo. Most of these players who are playing Gaelic football are still working, but they need to go back to their normal job. All right. We need to have a return to run protocol, which is what RTR is. We need to have a return to train protocol. Oh, and the most popular word we ever see, that return to play protocol. And we've suddenly got 3 stages before that. So we need to think about what the job is, what's involved, when can they start running, okay, in terms of that situation. So it's pieces in a jigsaw. We're trying to create that jigsaw puzzle. And if a piece of that jigsaw doesn't fit, something isn't right. And that's really important that we address that and we look at that and go, yeah, it should sit in there, but that piece doesn't fit in. Either we're doing something wrong, we've given them the wrong work to do, or there's something going on outside. There's Diane talking about things that might happen with fans. It happens to players as well. A player comes in, I'm not giving anything away with it. I remember a player coming in once, can't train today, used to, so straight. It was all right yesterday, didn't do a lot, went to school. One of the players came to me and said, it's not training today. No. You know why? Look, these two, so can't get in, just lost 10 grand on the horse. All right? So because he's moved something nice over the picture of somebody going down, he'll start there, he's been listening to the horse race on his mobile. He's put 10 grand on the horse to win. And obviously in that situation, it's lost. Not trained today, just lost 10 grand. All right? So that's the sort of thing you're thinking about. Why is that the injury sore? Because he's lost 10 grand or because he's naturally in that situation? The prequel bit I talked about, can we do injury prevention? And rehabilitation really begins with our screening program, because we're going to pick up things that we find that might be related. We'll look at that picture there. And I've got a lad there that's 17 years old and we've got some asymmetry there. So I've got a chance and I need to try and deal with that. So our baseline skeletal data is really, really important. Okay. Some of you might wonder why we still have wooden plinths. When I first started, you used to use shortwave diaphragm, which you couldn't use metal plinths. But actually, it's really good because it makes sure they don't cheat on the push that heel against there. So we can look at our ranges of motion with our individuals. And I'd love to talk to you longer about this, but again, we're under constraints. Let's make life simple. All right. But the important thing with assessment, let's not all bother about goniometers and all the measurements that we do. Let's use our eyes to look at our individuals. When you go back, I want you to do one thing. When you look at your patients, you can break your patients down into 8 categories. And you can sit them on the bed and you can get into it and you'll learn so much from that particular posture. So it takes, we've all got social media, we've all checked that they can use it. So we're going to look at these individuals and we can categorize our athletes into one of those 8 categories. Okay. And that's the most important one in terms of our ability to do that position, because that's obviously going to have an effect in terms of what we're doing. So if we look at the 8 categories, I reckon in my time at Blackburn, I saw 7 out of the 8 categories. I've yet to find a player who falls into that category. And I've seen a lot of players. I think that's an area that's obviously an older age group. But all these players fall into different categories. Now, the ideal one is category A, because it's been well documented that in category A, the chances of soft tissue injuries are a lot less. We look at the other categories, and then we've got various histories in those players. All right. And again, I could bore you for longer than what we've got in terms of time. But that is a simple, quick assessment. And how do we progress that? Now, this is not a textbook. This is one that I've come along with, because all I've done here, I've done one thing different. What have I done different there with that picture to what we had in the first picture? You're all flagging. Bend the knees, you've taken the hamstring out of the equation. But what does this picture tell me? So all I've done there is taken a circle on a computer, run it through PSIS, run it through C7, and we've got a massive gap here. Because all these movements
He's from his upper thoracic cervical. So he can touch the floor with his hands, but I know he's got spinal issues. You have any back problems?
No, never.
All right.
So why have you got shoes on with like great big 7-inch heels on? Because my back doesn't hurt this time.
I see you've never had back problems. Well, I have when I go out and after 2 or 3 hours standing up. Now, this is a typical story of a player. Injury problems, bilateral calf problems. Well, so what's that got to do with what you just showed us there? Well, just looking, you know, we're obviously looking at the great anatomy. Plantar fascia connects them with the calf, which connects them with the hamstring, which goes over the lower back, comes over the top of the thoracic spine and over the skull. So if we strip out the superficial back line, in an average 6-foot male, it's actually 8 foot too long. So by working on plantar fascia, can we affect hamstring? Yes. By working on his plantar, will it affect his spinal thing? Yes. But what you forgot to tell us is he's 32 years old. How quickly can you make a change? It's not very quickly. I'm wasting my time doing it. Highly likely. All right, there's a valued asset to the floor, so we need to work on him. If he's 18 years old, I'm going to get somewhere. All right, so the age makes a big difference. And again, I would love to talk for longer, but again, we're under pressure to move on. Take those pictures there. We've got a right mixed bag, haven't we? Okay, and we're asking the players to do exactly the same movements in terms of prehabilitation. No, we're not, because we're taking out the players with bilateral hip problems and some that are asymmetrical and some that are very flexible, and we're giving them different programs. Or we should be. Or is it just easier to give everybody the same program and it makes life easy and we can all go and have a cup of tea? It depends how you want to take your physio careers, all right, in that situation. Probably the most important slide I am going to show you of the night, all right? I would say I see a lot of patients nowadays who've had injuries for a long period of time, and I would guarantee you 99 out of 100 stem from an ankle problem. All right, I've got a knee problem, I've got a hip problem. I guarantee you've got there'll be an ankle issue, and you'll see why when I put the next slide up. So the normal range of motion in the ankle, dorsiflexion and plantarflexion. Dorsiflexion is 20, plantarflexion is 50. In order to get a normal gait pattern, and I apologise to people on that side, I'm not using them. Normal gait pattern. When you walk, all right, you need 10 degrees of dorsiflexion, and you need 20 degrees of plantarflexion. When you run, you need 20 degrees of dorsiflexion and 25 degrees of plantarflexion. And what does that tell us? Well, rather than put you under the spot, it tells us that we need to get full dorsiflexion back to allow us to move and to run properly. Now, people who've had problems, they've got ankle problems, will get that problem because they don't get the dorsiflexion back. And it happens so many times. I wish I had a fiver for every patient I ever saw with dorsiflexion problems. When did you yank into your ankle? Oh, not 2 years ago. That's not a problem, that's my knee. But the reason why you're running because your ankle isn't working right. All right? So that's one of the reasons why. So we'll look at that. That's a really key fact in terms of the rehab. Okay. Angular velocities, again, I'm not going to talk about that. But I am going to talk about this in terms of ankle biomechanics. Now, one of the things you have to realise that when we're looking at gender differences in terms of skeletal movement, there's differences obviously around the pelvis, there's differences around the knee. But the one thing where male and female athletes unite is that the ankle biomechanics are virtually the same. So if you find a problem at ankle with a female athlete or a male, I guarantee you will have problems. And obviously, because the female skeleton is different to the pelvis and the knee, it will have bigger problems. So always keep coming back to ankle. There will be something there, I guarantee, in a lot of cases you see. Not quite sure why. I think yeah. Another thing we do on screening. All right. So we might use pieces of equipment like this, and I'm not going to bore you because this is one of my pet subjects. Isokinetics, I've been using it for about 30 years. So I do use equipment with a 3-pin plug on, but it's an exercise-based thing, so take that from there. And during pre-season, we will do various tests, and I'm not going to dwell on that too much. But the important thing from this, that the data we get, and the numbers don't matter here, but what happens is, thanks to a very skillful person on Microsoft Excel, they produce this document for me, and we put all the numbers in, and suddenly there's a red flag appears on this player here because there's an issue with his hammy-quad ratio. And we flag him up as, you know what, he's a highly risk player in terms of hamstring injury. So what do? We give him a different prehab program to the ones in amber because they're a moderate risk, and the ones in green are a low risk. So we give them different things to do because they've got different skeletal demands. We're not doing a prehab program
because it's done at Bayern Munich or at Barcelona. We're not copying theirs. We're doing it for the squad of players we are dealing with. All right, and that makes a big difference. Okay. Sequel to injury reoccurrence. Last few slides. Okay. Only 1/3 of sub-elite competitive team sport athletes in Australia who is football, netball, basketball, and football return to competitive sport 12 months after surgery. 33%. All right, of non-elite athletes. That's a high number of people not going back to sport. In contrast, almost all professional football athletes in Europe return to their previous levels because that's their job, because they have got facilities and staff to support them and everything else. And that's the difference where that occurs. So that's what becomes hard for your non-elite athletes. Last two slides. All right. I think there's a problem within the world of physio, sports therapy, rehabilitation, because when things don't go well, and trust me, everything you do, oh yeah, well, I'm going to get these exercises, this will get better. Things don't happen. Diane showed you a picture of a progression like that, and then one that looked like a worm that was on alcohol. All right, it was all over the place. Things will get better, go worse. It will happen. All right, that's part of life. And one of the things I often see is that, yeah, players not doing this, players not doing that. I think there's a very poor ability amongst professionals to self-reflect. Is it me? Have I given the wrong things to do? Have I given them too much work to do? Have I loaded them too much? Have I done this wrong? You've got to be able to self-reflect. So every player I'm treating, so I'm going back tonight, the two players I've been working with today, all right, it's been a tough day, trust me, 9 hours of work still, but two players, all right, everything's gone really well, but I'm not going to sit back on my laurels because I'm going to plan tomorrow on the basis that if things are slightly sore, then we need to change things and so on. So my plan has to change if that's happened. And I've got to have two choices if that happens, because that's what elite sports people expect me to do with them. And that's the pressure I'll be expected to be under tomorrow. So I've got to have those pathways if I need. So that's really important. So whatever I'd say to you, don't forget the ankle slide and have that ability to self-reflect on what you do. All right, because that's really important. Last story. I put one at the start and one at the end. I didn't want to get sidetracked. When I first started at United, got the job at United, luckily, having worked in rugby league for 10 years of my life, somehow I got the job even though I wasn't a football fan. Rugby league was my game. And went for the job, went to the Cliff training ground, and they'd had brand new kit put in. And they spent like 30 grand on like 5 pieces of kit. And the gaffer took me around on my interview. Nice kit, looked really nice, all smart, you know, powdered white paint, nice red seats and so on. Went direct to the gym. I looked at it and I went, and I hadn't got the job then. I went, not for me. What do you mean, not for you? No, he spent so much money on it. It's my interview. I thought, well, I might as well tell him what I think. So I said, not for me. I said, I don't get this. I said, I know I'm a rugby league man. I know I've come from rugby league, but I said, I watch football and I've seen Mark Hughes play football. Some of you remember Mark Hughes. And I said, all the kit you bought for the gym, that all involves pulling weights towards the body. I watched Mark Hughes play on Saturday, and it's that. You're pushing everything away. So every piece of kit you bought does the opposite of what Mark Hughes does. So why have you bought it? Gaffer said, no. So the gaffer short of words. So what do you want? I said, well, give us 500 quid. I said, and we'll get some boxing bags up, pads, gloves and everything. It's all pushing away. Take it away when we go pre-season. Lads will enjoy it. Right, okay. So I've got rid of the kit. I've been there about a month. I was still on my probation. Guy in the car park pulls me and says, Dave, you better go and see the gaffer. He is blowing a gasket in there. And the day before, the boxing stuff had been put in. So I go and knock on the gaffer. Hi, morning, gaffer. Get in that gym. Go and have a look. I can't repeat the words to you. So I go in the gym. I get in. I look around. Everything's laid out nice. The gloves are out. The pads are out. The bags are up. Not a problem. Looks fine to me. Go back to the gaffer. Sorry, gaffer, I'm missing this. Get back in that effing gym. Go and have a look. So I'm thinking, you know what? I bet it's like sky blue or it's going to be Celtic colours, green and white. So this is arranged and so on. I think I'll make a right mess here. Could be out of work in the first 4 weeks of being here. So I go back in the gym. No, as you can see, it's red and white and so on. Don't see it. So he's gone back to his office. He's come out. Come on, I'll show you. And trust me, as I'm standing here, this is a true story. I'm not making this up. The company that put it in for us, I didn't realise, bought them from somebody else. And the name of the company, you can see on the bag, is Alex. And across every bag, the gaffer's name was across the front of the bag. And I stood there and, oh my God, I said, well, I don't know why that's happened, Gaffer, but I'll tell you what, I bet the lads knocked the living daylights out of that bag. And the lads were still using it for many years and so on. So in that situation, it broke the ice and it was fine. But what I'm trying to say is it's not what you spend in terms of the money, it's what we do with that work. And again, some of you might have seen, certainly United and at Blackburn, a lot of pre-season stuff where we use bags and shields. I've done a session with 2 of the girls at City today using bags and gloves and everything else, and they seem to enjoy it. I think they're trying to knock me out at times. But in that situation, that's what you're using, all right? And again, it's that pushing away thing. You know, I've worked with a goalkeeper today and, you know, a striker. And in that situation, it's that pushing away thing that's important. Okay? So that's just simple logic things to me in terms of what. So I'm sorry to being a bit rushed. I know we're under pressure, aren't we, for using the room and everything. So thanks for your time. And obviously, any questions, then just fire them away. Thank you very much to both Diane and Dave. As Dave's alluded to, we are under significant time pressure. We do need to get out of the room, unfortunately. So we're not going to have any time for Q&A. To everyone who's joined us on Zoom, thank you very much. We will fix the audio and we'll send you out a copy of the recording so you can access it, catch up on any bits that you found difficult to hear, because it seems a few of you did have some issues. To everybody in the room, thank you very much for coming. Thank you to everyone that's made the event possible, in particular Owen and UA92. Owen, if you want to come up and help us close everything up.